One of the things that I think is fascinating is photography. Because when you grab a camera, you grab an interesting body, like, the camera, and you grab the lens and you begin to take an image and you take a picture of it, it's fascinating to see the picture come to life. You look at some different images of things that people take, and you look at some of the different images of photographers, and you're like, man, I don't know that I could ever do that. You look at some of the different things that they do and the way that they know the angles and they hit it just right. But one of the secrets that I found, just in knowing some photographers like Doyle, who was up here a few ago. He loves photography. But one of the things that I've found is that there's this little thing that you can put on the end of a lens. It's called a polarizing lens. It's a filter, basically. And look at what the filter will do. The filter will take an image and bring to life what the common eye can just barely see. You look onto the left, and this is just without a filter. You look at the right, and the vividness of the image pops off the screen. You look at this image right here. You've got a beautiful countryside. To the left, you have no filter, and to the right, you can see what's in the water if you look really close. You can see the trees. You can see with great clarity what the image is of. And let's look at one more. This is another picture. This is from a beach that I think I would love to be at. I don't know about you guys, but there's value in just putting your feet in the beach and just sitting and chilling and thinking, I don't have any responsibilities in life right now. But you imagine just being there. To the left, you can see what is in the water. You can see the great color and the detail. And to the right, it's still a pretty picture. But it's fascinating what a filter will do. When you put this polarizing filter on the end of a camera, it brings the image to life. In fact, I was doing a little research on this idea of filters. I was looking at this. There's all kinds of different filters. There's like B and W, Anyway, there's a car that's a BMW that's really cool to drive. There's a filter that is like a B plus W. We'll say that. But you look at the different filters, and one of the things I found about the filters is it gives this definition. One of the bloggers, he was talking about the necessity of having it and why it's critical. And he pointed filters out as this necessity. I want you to read this definition. Filters can be indispensable for capturing scenery in extremely difficult lighting conditions. And they can enhance colors and reduce reflections, or they can simply protect the lens. That's the value of a filter. Is a filter, when you're looking at a regular image, when you're looking at a regular scenery and you want to take a picture, you want a filter because it's indispensable for capturing what you're trying to capture, especially in difficult lighting, and it can enhance the colors, as we saw, and it can reduce the reflections, and it can even protect the lens. Now today, what we're going to be looking at for a few moments is we're going to look at maybe a tweak on that as a filter that we can apply to life that can do a lot of the same things. A filter that we can apply to life that can genuinely protect us and can help us and can ultimately bring great clarity to what life is all about. In fact, I would use this definition as we're moving forward. The filter we're going to talk about, the filters, they can be indispensable for understanding life in extremely difficult times. When you look at Jesse's story, how do you process that? How do you really handle what you're walking through when life seems to be so difficult? And then when your wife says, let's go to church, how do you juxtapose that? You look at that, it can be indispensable for understanding life in extremely difficult times, and they can enhance our life and ultimately protect our faith. Today, we're going to be looking at a couple of filters. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to be looking at 5 different filters that I think can provide incredible clarity to the life that we've been dealt, to the life that we have, and to the decisions that we make, to the future that we want to have. It can bring incredible clarity to every step we take. Now, to get there, I want us to step back for a moment, because you heard me say at the beginning, and you've heard me say from time to time, our mission as a church is this, is we want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. We want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, when I think about that, when I think about who Jesus is, here's the fascinating thing. When I look at the accounts from Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, when I look at the accounts of how these individuals documented the life of Jesus, one of the things that jumps off the page at me is this, is people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And the crazy thing is that Jesus actually liked them back. For some of us, that's really freeing. I mean, if you were to ask, who do you think Jesus is more apt to hang out with, the church people or the non-church people? If you read the accounts of Jesus, or the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, documenting Jesus' life, you see that he was much more apt to spend time with those that maybe we would shake our head at and say, you don't belong here. He was much more apt to hang out with the individuals that maybe were on the edge of society, that are trying to stick in, that are trying to find their place, or trying to find some place to belong. And it seems as though everywhere else has just pushed them away. And yet Jesus would go over and he would touch those that were ceremonially unclean. He would go and he would spend time with, he would look in the eyes of some of the most gregarious and outlandish individuals who did heinous crimes according to the culture and say, hey, Zacchaeus, I want to go to your house today. What does it look like to have a growing relationship with Jesus? Well, for us, I base it on the assumption that a growing relationship with Jesus is open and available for everybody. In fact, if we're going to be honest, I genuinely believe that if we were to have a good conversation, that the majority of people in our world today would love to have a relationship with the Jesus that they experienced through the course of Matthew and Mark and Luke and John. But the pushback always comes when we see the people who claim to be the followers of the man they want to be around. And you begin to say, there's no way I want to be with them. That's not right. That's not what I read. That's not what it's all about. But I have a feeling and I have a hunch, and just in conversations I've had with people that are far from Christ, that are far from church, that really want nothing to do with church, and that might be you today. And if it is, I want to say thank you so much for coming. But I genuinely believe that there's something inside all of us that really wants to have a relationship with Jesus. As weird as that might sound coming out of my mouth, there's genuinely this desire for an individual who would look at you and not call you the world's names, but would look at you and say, you're mine. Follow me. I know you're a tax collector. I know you're a fisher. I know you don't really have much going on in life, but hey, follow me. In fact, I would make the statement, you've probably heard me say it from time to time, that following Jesus will make your life better, and it will make you better at life. And the reason I say that, and the reason I believe that so passionately is this, is because when we truly are following Jesus, you know what happens inside of us? We begin to be better at life. We begin to be more loving. We begin to be more forgiving. We begin to make wiser decisions. We begin to make decisions that are not solely dependent upon me, and we begin to look out for the me that's next to me as opposed to just making decisions about me. You know what happens when we do that is all of a sudden life begins to take on meaning and purpose. And so when I say that following Jesus will make your life better, yeah, it will make your life better. It won't make you richer, I hate to break it to you, but it'll make you kinder. It won't necessarily make every single thing you ever pray for come true, but it will make your relationships richer and truer, and it will give you this idea, this joy, even in the midst of sorrow and frustration. Following Jesus will make your life better, and it will make you better at life. When we live out these ideas, I mean, patience, isn't that merely being merciful with your time for the good of somebody else? I mean, kindness, isn't that ultimately leveraging your strength for the good of somebody else rather than pointing out their weaknesses? When we genuinely follow Jesus, it makes us better at life because we breathe easier. And it makes our life better because our relationships are richer. Our joy is pure and greater. So if following Jesus makes us better at life and it makes our life better, then our mission is we want to stir you, regardless of where you're at. We want to stir everybody, me included, into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. But that brings me to my question. What does this look like? I mean, how would you define a growing relationship with Jesus Christ? For some of us, a growing relationship with Jesus Christ is centered around checkboxes. Well, a growing relationship with, how do I grow in my relationship? I need to make sure I check off all the boxes. Did I pray today? Check. Did I read the Bible today? Check. Did I stop at all the red lights? Check. Oh, wait, never mind. Didn't do that. So oftentimes a growing relationship with Jesus is centered around this idea of checkboxes. For some of us, a growing relationship is centered around this idea of places we've got to go and expectations we've got to do and things we've got to fulfill. And so we're constantly doing, and yet we're never breathing. So what does it look like? What does it look like to genuinely have a growing relationship with Jesus? Well, here's a simple definition, but a definition that is oh so challenging, and something we're going to unpack for the next couple of weeks is this. I believe a growing relationship with Jesus looks like this. It's a growing faith validated by a growing love for God and others. It's a growing faith. Another way of putting faith is confidence in God. It's a confidence that God is who he says he is and will do what he says he will do. A growing faith validated by a growing confidence or by a growing love for God and others. And the definition we have here, this actually comes from one of the letters that Paul, who, by the way, if you hate Christians, you and Paul would probably get along really well. Paul found it his mission in life to eliminate this movement called the Jesus way. These individuals, right after the resurrection of Jesus, they were going around and they were telling people all about how Jesus, he came, he predicted his own death, burial, and resurrection, and then he pulled it off. You should just follow him because, oh my goodness, who can do that? And Paul said, I don't believe you, so we need to eradicate that. He got papers signed and sealed, and he was going out ready to just eliminate every single movement that even moved in the name of Jesus. And then Jesus stopped him in his tracks. And he went from trying to purify his religion to genuinely dying for this man named Jesus. What did Paul say? Paul begins to talk about a growing faith by this. And he's writing this letter to the church in Galatia. And he says this, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. Paul writes it into a city that they're trying to figure out what do we need to do? I mean, we've got a lot of Jews here. We've got a lot of Gentiles here. How do we mix and match? What do we need to do? What do we need to make sure the Gentiles do? And what do we need to maybe have a little grace on? And Paul says, hey, let's just quit the argument. The only thing that counts is faith. Now, wait a second, Paul. The only thing? Maybe we should have them at least go to the synagogue maybe twice a week, 3 times. No, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. And we've talked about what love looks like. I mean, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about unpacking love, and we made this statement that to genuinely love, it means that our bend is not towards being critical, but it's towards being curious. That when there's somebody in our midst that maybe we just don't understand, I mean, we can all agree that we don't know all the answers, right? But there are things we don't know, and when somebody knows something that we don't know, rather than being critical, we want to suspend judgment and be curious. A growing love is one that is constantly being more and more curious. A growing love is a love that's characterized by this selfless desire to live a life for others and not merely for oneself. A growing love ultimately answers the question, what does love require of you? Well, that is such a difficult question to answer. It almost seems too simple. Really, is spiritual growth defined by growing faith, validated by growing love in God and others? And I would say yes. Growing love, when we begin to genuinely show the love that Jesus first showed us, we begin to see our faith, we begin to see our relationship with Jesus grow. But it's this growing faith issue that What does that look like? I mean, if I were to ask you, how does one grow your faith? I mean, we can all go from here and be like, I know how to love better. I can answer that question. What does love require of me? I got it, Scott. But how do we really grow faith? And that's our mission as a church. We genuinely want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus. And so, in other words, we genuinely, everything we do, from the environments we create, to the circles that we push, to Starting Point, to Wombaland, to Upstreet, we want to do everything we can to such a degree that we are putting you in position to grow in your faith and to grow in your love. So what does that look like? Well, I'm glad you asked. Remember I told you a couple of minutes ago, the filters. I want to re-engage this definition because this is going to help us put some parameters around what we're about to talk about. We talked about filters, and I basically said this, and the filters we're going to look at is how do we look through these filters of faith to figure out if we're growing or not. These filters are indispensable for understanding life in extremely difficult times. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more next week. And they can enhance our life, and they can ultimately protect our faith. So what are these filters? Today we're going to look at 2. Next week we're going to look at the final 3. But the first one is this. In fact, every single time I've asked the question, I know several other pastors have done the same thing. Tell me about how your faith grew. What was it in you that really allowed you, that championed you, that challenged you to become closer to God or to take, to have more of a spiritual moment, if you would? And without fail, so many times people say, well, I went to this church. I began going to this church, and not necessarily this church, but a church, and the pastor began speaking as if it just came alive. Like the teaching that was coming out of his mouth, I was just like, oh my goodness, I've never experienced teaching like this. I began to go and think about, what can I do with this? How do I take what they're teaching and put it into my life? And you begin asking the question, what do I do with what I just heard? Practical teaching is one of the foundations of growing faith. Practical teaching, putting yourself in a position where you're constantly listening and learning and applying what you teach. I can't tell you how many times I've had individuals come up to me and say, man, Scott, the messages we've heard here, it seems like every single Sunday we're going home and we're talking about it at the kitchen table. It seems like throughout the course of the week, there's something to be talked about. There's something that we're continually talking about, and we're talking, how do we use this in our life? That is foundational. I love that reality. I love that you share that with me. I love that whether it's me, oftentimes it's Andy on a screen, that we value practical teaching, and here's why. Because Jesus, he valued it as well. In fact, in one of his most famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus made this statement. He says this, therefore, whoever hears these words of mine, right? I mean, whoever hears these words and puts them into practice is like a wise man. I don't know about you, but I would love for at the end of my day for Jesus to say, you were a wise man. And yet he says, anyone who hears these words and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And then he goes on and he says this, the rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Jesus is looking at these individuals and he's saying, hey, come in. I want you not just to hear it. I want you to do something with it. I don't want you just to hear it and check a box and say, hey, you know what? I made it to church. Life is good. Check. I can go do whatever I want to on Saturday night because I'm going to church Sunday morning. Check. There's this idea of not just being there, but applying what you hear. In fact, I absolutely believe that your faith grows. Your faith in God deepens as you do what he says. Now, Jesus' little brother, James, imagine this. Let me ask you this for a second. James, who was Jesus' little brother, became a follower of Jesus. What would it take for you to have your little brother, what would it take for your older brother to prove to you that he was, in fact, the Son of God? I don't know about you, but if I had an older brother that kept pushing that, I would want to hurt him, and I would be like, no, you're not, no, you're not, no, you're not. Well, James lived under the shadows of this incredible guy that did no wrong, that was mama's favorite, and yet then he goes and says, I'm going to die, and I'm going to come back to life, and he pulls it off. And it says, after the resurrection, James became a follower of Jesus as well. He began to become a follower of his brother. And I could imagine James is probably on the outskirts listening to Jesus talk about every single message. And the Sermon on the Mount's probably a message that he preached regularly. It's probably one of his go-tos because he's like, guys, you need to get this. You need to get this. You've heard it said, but I want to tell you. You've heard it said, but I say to you, you need to get this. Let's hammer it down. And I imagine James was just listening from afar thinking, my crazy older brother, like what would it take to get rid of him? And yet James, on the other side of it, becomes a pastor and a leader in the name of his brother. He makes this statement. He says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. So I want to ask you a question. What are you doing with what you hear? And what are you doing? Genuinely, what are you doing with what you hear? Because I would make an argument that it is a lot easier just to hear about it and not do it. I mean, it's a lot easier just to talk about forgiveness, isn't it? It's a lot easier to talk about giving. It's a lot easier to talk about loving. It's a lot easier to talk about helping. But it's that doing side that challenges us. It's a lot easier to talk about it than it really is for us to do it. And I would say this, that obedience is an expression of faith. It's not just about talking, it's about allowing ourselves to do it, whatever it is. So here's a question, just to get you thinking, practical teaching. Are you listening to practical teaching on a consistent basis? For us, we value practical teaching. We think it is a hallmark of what we can do on a Sunday morning. And that's why when it comes to Wombaland and Upstreet, when it comes to transit, even when it comes to this environment right here, we want to ensure that you have the opportunity and your kids have the opportunity to learn, to be challenged, to be engaged, to experience practical teaching. And then for them to be able to have the handles to know what to do with what they just heard. I know that at times, the beautiful thing about what happens in here is that oftentimes it's podcasted or you can get it online, YouTube. But the crazy thing is when it comes to our kids, the things that they learn in Upstreet and Wombaland, those aren't things that we can necessarily transport right now. But even to a greater degree, the leader that is investing in your kid's life, that is taking the big idea of the day. I know in Upstreet, we're talking contentment, which is a difficult thing for any of us to really wrestle with. But for a leader to step into your child's life and be able to take this big idea of contentment and bring it into their level and show them practical ways that they can learn to be content, it is so valuable from my perspective. That I would encourage you and challenge you that when it comes to your kids' faith, putting them in those environments is a critical step that we think is so valuable for the longevity of their faith. Because we've seen how it's grown our faith. It was that one time I learned that one thing from that person who made it so practical. And that's our mission in every single environment we have on Sunday morning. But it's not just practical teaching. The next thing that I want us to look at is this idea of personal ministry. Now, I had an incredible conversation earlier today. Every Sunday morning, our volunteers, we value our volunteers. I love, and I say that, so you can ask anybody in a blue shirt and say, hey, does Scott says they value you guys, but do they really value you? Like, put them to the test. But one of the things that we love is on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock, we try to have everything set up and ready to roll because we want to just have a time to breathe as our volunteers. And I love this morning as we got the chance, I said, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about today. And I want to know how serving, how volunteering has grown your faith. And it was just fascinating to hear the stories of how being a part of something bigger than myself emboldens me and challenges me and encourages me, gives me the words to say, the things to do. It helps me know what's going on as I'm going through life. I'll never forget our Upstreet director, Kyle Hubbard. He's a phenomenal young man, just graduated from college. So when he was in high school, I was his student pastor. And there was one time that I reached out to Kyle. I said, hey, I've got a question for you. I want you to teach for me for 5th and 6th graders. And he looked at me with his eyes big as can be and like, you don't know what you just asked. And I'm like, no, I do. I want you to do it. And here's the lesson I want you to teach. And I'd like for you to do it this morning. Ready, go. And I still can't believe I did that. He did a phenomenal job. He killed it. And not like he killed the ministry. Like we get back the next Sunday, like, where'd everybody go? Kyle, you're done. But he did an incredible job. And in talking to him after the fact, and I knew that if I were to give it to him beforehand, he probably would have been like, okay, and over-prepared. But here's what happened. As I began talking to him, he understood that there is something going on that's bigger than himself, and he understood the need to depend on God to help him through it. Because he knew he couldn't do it. He knew he couldn't handle it, but he knew that in the course of the morning that he had a couple hours to prepare. We were there early. It wasn't like I said, hey, 5 minutes, go. But he shared with me that there is this dependence on God that helped to build confidence in God. That when you serve, when you put yourself on a volunteer team, not just here at the church, but regardless of where you volunteer your time, when you leverage your privilege, when you leverage your resources, when you leverage your gifts for the good of the me beside me, when you serve based upon something that challenges you, maybe it's giving your time to be a mentor at one of our elementary schools or our middle schools. Maybe it's giving your time to one of our Intersect partners, whether it's I Can Still Shine or whether it's going with Teen Life or several other partners that we have. When you leverage your privilege, when you leverage your gifting and your resources for the good of somebody else, it grows your dependence, your confidence in God. You begin to say, I don't know that I can do this. I have that conversation with guest services individuals. Now, Scott, you don't want me on guest services. Why? Because I'm an introvert. No. We have a lot of introverts that come. And let me encourage you. Introverts need to know that there's introverts here. If all introverts see is me, they're scared. We need you. We need your help. We need you to encourage. We need you to be with us. You see, Peter, who was one of Jesus' followers, he made this statement. He said, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. See, when we begin to look at this idea of personal ministry without the filter, oftentimes we're looking at serving as through one of two things. Number one, that pastor just wants me to do it so that he can build his own kingdom. And please, I want to verbalize that because that is not our aim. It can so easily become the aim in a Hollywood society where, you're plastering different people's faces all over the world. We genuinely want to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And we understand that it takes volunteers to do what we do. But if we're not careful, if we just use our volunteers, it doesn't grow their faith. The other side of it is, oftentimes I've seen it where people want to volunteer so they get the accolades. You want to volunteer so people see you and it looks good on a resume. It looks good in whatever you're trying to get plugged into. Peter says, and I would even say what Jesus came to do, he fulfilled the old covenant and brought in a brand new covenant. And this covenant wasn't this idea that I am going to serve so people see me. It's this idea that I want to do whatever it takes to honor the person next to me. I want to do whatever it takes to honor those around me. I want to do whatever it takes to help, to be a help, to serve, to use my gifts to serve others. Yeah, but what if nobody sees me serve? It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, but don't you understand? Like, I need to be caught doing good so that I can send that text message to my wife and say, hey, guess what? I'm making a difference, right? Like, I need people to see me so that I can be seen doing good. And Peter would say, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. If we're ever volunteering or serving for our own accolades, we are missing the mark. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't grow our faith. It just makes us feel like a rat in a wheel, right? We're just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and going crazy, trying to make sense of life. When all of a sudden, a simple filter change can bring extraordinary clarity. It can bring extraordinary clarity to our steps. So, I've got a question. Where do you regularly serve others? Where do you regularly serve others? Because I genuinely believe that when we serve, when we leverage our gifts for the good of somebody else, it grows a dependence upon, an understanding of, an idea that my life is bigger than me. Reading Andy Stanley's newest book, it's entitled Irresistible. At the very beginning of the book, he's writing about this idea of purpose. And it was fascinating. Listen to what he said. He said, when we live lives on purpose, for a purpose, we are a means to an end. And I had pushback. I'm like, no, wait a second. I want to live a life on purpose, for a purpose, but I don't want to be a stinking means to an end. If I'm going to be honest with you, I don't want to be a means to an end. It sounds so dishonoring, right? I want to make a difference. I want people to see, hey, go Scott. I mean, but isn't it true that when we volunteer, when we serve, when we leverage our gifts and talents for the good of somebody else, what we're doing is we are genuinely a means to an end. I know it sounds bad. But think about it. What you're doing is you're helping somebody else in the long run. What you're doing is you're helping somebody succeed. What you're doing is you're making a difference, not just now, but beyond what you can ever see. And that takes dependence. That takes an understanding that, man, life is bigger than me. I want to make a difference. I want to make a difference that goes beyond me. That's my aim. And when personal ministry, when you begin to look at through the filter of, I want to volunteer to make a difference, not here and today, but for the long haul, it changes the way we see life, and it changes the clarity with which we see life. So today we looked at private teaching, practical teaching, and we looked at personal ministry. Next week, we're going to look at the next three. I'm going to go ahead and give them to you. The first one is private disciplines, providential relationships, and pivotal circumstances. We're going to look at those next week. And here's what I want to encourage you, why I'm excited about next week, is because next week, we're taking these three because there's a family in our church. There's a family that's in our midst. They serve in different capacities, but they were hit with a pivotal circumstance. And a completely overwhelming circumstance that could have easily destroyed their faith. But then they saw relationships that jumped into their life, and it changed the way they saw life to such a degree that they began to take on disciplines like never before. And I'm excited because next week you're going to get to hear from this family as they share how these disciplines really held up in their life. But before we do that, I want to just close with this. If our mission is to lead you and me into a growing relationship with Jesus, what is it? Well, a growing relationship with Jesus is defined as growing faith validated by growing love in God and others. But here's what I would encourage you. It is not a destination. Spiritual growth is a journey. It's a journey. When we begin to think that our destination, we've made it, we've arrived, Like when that is our MO and we're trying to check enough boxes, we're trying to do enough to make everybody around us happy, we're trying to make sure God thinks we're good, and so God, is this enough? Is this enough? Is this enough? It is not a destination. Spiritual growth is a journey to which, if it really is a journey, when you stop stepping, you stop growing. When you stop stepping, when you stop taking what you've learned and applying it to your life, when you stop deciding that I want to look through life, I want to look at life through the gauge of personal ministry, and I want to leverage my gifting and my talents for the good of others. When we stop stepping, we stop growing. But here's an indicator. Your indicator for growth is not your feelings. It's your actions. So, can I ask you, what is your next step? What is your next step? If our mission is to grow, is to lead you in a growing relationship with Jesus, then I firmly believe for some of you, that next step might very well be going to Starting Point's orientation in just a few moments. Because you walked in here today and you're trying to figure out life, and you're trying to figure out how to make sense of life, and you're trying to understand these major questions that you have, like Jesse, and how it does not make sense with the God that you believe, or the God you were raised thinking about, or the God that, man, if God is good, then why is this continue to happening? I want you to know your questions deserve a conversation. And maybe your next step is taking on the Starting Point orientation, just to say, what is it? I would love to hear. You say my questions deserve a conversation. Let me lay my questions on you. Let's see if you can converse. Let's go. Maybe for you, that next step is this. It is making a commitment to being a part or having your kids in our environments on a regular basis. Because we believe practical teaching is so critical at every level. And we want you to know we are doing everything we can to ensure that your kids' faith is refined and the filters are there so they can take these big ideas of God and make them practical, make them valuable, make them something that allows your kid not just to have a good time, but to be set up to succeed long term. Maybe for you, it's answering the question of where will you serve? Where will you volunteer? I want you to know the beautiful thing is here at North Tarrant, we have incredible volunteers. And some of you might be saying, you know what, there's no way I would ever be able to lead a kids group, and I'm introverted, but man, I love waking up early, and I would love to drink coffee and help set up this place. If that's you, man, you're an abnormality, but we would love. But for real. Maybe some of you in here, you're like, I don't know where I would like to volunteer, but man, I want to see life bigger than me. I want to be a means to an end. I want to help somebody else's faith grow. I want you to know we've got a card in your seat that we would love for you. If you have questions about serving on a team here, about taking personal ministry and taking it personal, we would love to have that conversation. In fact, I would encourage you, if you have any questions about that, the gallery is a great next step. But I don't want you to think that we're trying to hog all of the volunteers, because I know that there are some incredible nonprofits that are doing a remarkable job in our community that could use your hours, that could use your time, that could use your giftings to help make an incredible difference. In fact, in 2 weeks, we're going to be kicking off Be Rich. Be Rich is not a time for me to say, hey, give us money. It's a time for me to say, give us money so we can invest in our community. The 4th of May, I love Be Rich because we've got some nonprofits that we've already said, hey, if we were to raise X amount of dollars and give it all to you, what would you do? And we've gotten some incredible answers. And then we get to not only give them money, but we get to value them and give them resources and give them people to serve. And then we get to figure out, how do we love? I love the month of November because it is our Be Rich Sunday. You don't want to miss. And several of those partners have incredible needs. If you've got some needs, if you want to figure out how you can serve outside of Sunday, you ask. We can help you. So here's my question. What is your next step. God, I love you. God, I thank you for the fact that you are an incredible God that loves us. And God, I know many times in my life, the growing love, that sounds cool and it's great, but God, many times my faith has become so self-centered that the only person I truly love is the person I see in the mirror. The only time I really try to gain faith is only to make you happy, and it's not to leverage my love or my faith for the me besides me. And God, that is an atrocity, and for that I apologize. But God, I just ask that you would challenge us. That God, as we take steps throughout the course of the next couple of days and weeks, that God, we would constantly be looking at life through these lenses, through these filters. That we would be looking at practical teaching, that we'd be looking at personal ministry, and we would see how it brings great clarity to life, brings great clarity to next steps. But God, it brings great clarity to a growing confidence in you. God, obedience always does that for whatever reason. So God, I just ask that you would give us the courage, Father, to step forward and do whatever it is with what we've just heard. God, we love you and we thank you. It is in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.